Today's video is sponsored by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Now, in the last 18 months, I spent $200,000 to build a container home that was pulled straight from 8-year-old Kai's dream fort. Private hideaway? Check. Up high with a view? Check. 20,000 plus arcade games? Triple check. Rock climbing wall? Quadruple check. Endless supply of candy? Infinity check. Yeah, I'd say kid me would be pretty happy having this place. Now, here's what gets adult Kai excited. It cost me only $400 a month in fixed expenses to basically own this container home. And this is what gets me out of this world excited. It generates between $4,000 to $7,000 plus each month in gross revenues, leaving an extremely healthy profit margin. Now, in today's video, I'm going to break down all the major steps to build, as well as my cost of a modern day custom container home, and ultimately how much money I really made on this project. And of course, you're gonna get that epic tour too. And while you're watching this video, if you are appreciating it or a longtime viewer of the channel, help me out and hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. All right, so first things first, I need architectural and engineered plans. Now, how I like to get started in this phase is to get a rough idea of the build site, which is approximately a 50 foot by 50 foot square. Then, considering the sun, accessway, privacy, screening, etc., I sketch a very rough idea of what I'm looking for. Now, this was for free with my 3-year-old iPad and a note app, but I'm far from an architect or designer. So I hired my good friend and architect Carlos to help get me a set of blueprints. Now, it's easier for Carlos because I had already had a rough footprint and idea of where the windows and doors went, and he charged me a modest $1,800, which I can tell you is actually a really good deal. Now, once I had my blueprints, I had to get my structural engineering done too. Now, this is critical for any build, but particularly important for unique builds like a container. It just so happens the engineer I typically use also specializes in containers. And at the time, I was charged roughly $2.50 a square foot, or in this case, about $2,500. So in total, design and engineering took me about 3 months and cost me about $4,300. Now with my site plan, which looks kind of like this, it's actually really large. This is how big you have to print it, actually. And then my structural and this is actually one of our blueprints, of one of our projects. This was on the job site. So this is from the permitting department right here, telling you basically what you need to do and what you're approved for and everything. And your contractors will use this. But this is actually the architectural and structural plans all in one that is set up for the inspector and also for your crew to follow. Now, once I had all this, it was time to actually get my permits. Now, this was zoned and permitted as an ADU or guest home, and it's pretty straightforward. I just went to my county office with 2 physical sets of printed plans, just like this. By the way, make sure you bring these in, like an actual physical hard copy for most counties. They still keep these on file. There are print companies that can print these out for you. I think the last time I got 2 or 3 printed, it's about $12 to $15 a set. So it's really not that big of an expense at all. So in total, you're looking at between $30 to $45. Not a huge expense. Now, the county, like I said, wants 2 sets. So they keep one on record and they give you back the other with red marks and corrections, or that's for you to use and have on site at all times. Now, getting my permits and paying my taxes and all that good stuff took me about a month and cost only about $3,000. It really wasn't that bad for a guest home. Now, my county, I can start excavating and moving dirt for a build while permits are being reviewed, which is a really nice thing. Since I knew it was going to take about 4 to 6 weeks with permits, I hired a survey company to do something called a hub and tack to precisely mark where each of my piers were going to go for the foundation. Now, this was a nominal fee of about $350, and it took only about 3 hours. I then hired an excavation guy to start trenching the utilities for power and water and augering holes for the 21 holes for our pier foundation. Dirt work and trenching took 3 days and cost $1,900. I also used this time waiting on permits to start prepping and tying all the rebar and top plates for our piers. Now, some of our piers will be as deep as 14 feet, and our engineer plans had very specific callouts on the rebar. The top plates will go on top of the piers in the concrete once they're poured, and this is what the containers are welded to. This is to keep it in place, obviously. Now, in our area, unique, or what this is considered prototype construction, they are crazy over-engineered. I think they're over-engineered by 25%. I mean, if you look at the number of piers that we have, 21, some of them are 30 inches in diameter. I mean, they're massive, really big big overkill. I really don't think any type of earthquake or hurricane would move this thing once it's in place. Now, we waited another week or two for permits to get approved, and then it was time to start pouring the concrete for the foundation. I ordered roughly 50 cubic yards of concrete and a pump to get the concrete down the sonotubes, and it was a full day's worth of work with a full crew. You can see the top plates on top of the freshly poured piers. All the rebar, sonotubes, concrete, and labor cost just under $17,000. Now, after speaking and interacting with thousands of viewers just like you through our webinars, Q&A sessions, one-on-one strategy consultations, and then of course our full-blown land hacker program, hands down the biggest question that I get is, how do I know if a location is good enough to invest in or not? And for the first time ever, I'm opening up my team's experience and our nearly $15,000 software to help you in a free 12-minute call and analyze a location with you. Now, all you need to do is click on my Calendly link just down below and pick a day and time that works for you. Fill out some questions so we know a bit more about you, and then lock in your time with us. Then either I, Cam, or Jay will reach out to you, and I promise you'll get more insight on any location in those 12 minutes than hours or even days of researching on your own. And during that time, if you like what you see and what you learn, we can even discuss if you'd be a good fit for one of our programs. And if not, no worries, and you can take what you've learned to your next deal. Book a time with us now, because I can tell you that the slots will fill up pretty quickly. Link just down below. Next was to pick out my containers and get them to the property. Containers at this time were in really short supply, and they didn't have enough single-use containers in sizes that I was looking for, which were two 40-footers and two 20-footers. Now, oddly enough, the 20-footers were in such high demand that they were almost double the price of the 40-footers. So I decided to buy three 40-footers and then cut one in half to get my two 20-footers. It saved me money and solved the problem of sourcing, because I literally couldn't even get my hands on a 20-footer. Now, the three containers were $16,000 including delivery. Once the containers were on site, it was time to move them in place, and we needed a crane for that. Now, it's very important to consider if you have a large and flat enough space for a crane and its outriggers if you're thinking about building with containers. Now, fortunate for me, I recently just had the parking area flattened gravel the previous year, so we were good to go. You can see as we set the containers on top of the piers, we had to use metal shims, and Cody, my mobile welder, and me had to run around with some come-alongs to pull the containers into their exact positions and then weld them down to the piers. Now, the crane took about 3 hours and cost me $2,500. Now, it's the heavy and hard work when dealing with containers, metal work. Now, this is by far the most time-consuming, challenging, and expensive part of the project, or if you ever deal or work with containers. This includes cutting all the openings, putting in beams, metal tubing for around all your doors and openings for structural support, and anything else that the engineers are calling out for to make sure that the place is structurally sound. Containers are designed to be very strong, intact. But the minute you cut any part of the container, you've broken that structural integrity, and you have to reinforce it with either a lot of wood or, in my preference, more steel. Now, the total cost of steel was $7,000, primarily for the tube steel for the windows and doors, and then the giant beams for the large openings. I also had to hire my good friend Cody, who is one of the best mobile welders out there, to weld everything together for us, who is also certified for structural welding. Now, when we do things to code with permits, which I highly recommend everybody out there do if you want your money back, is to make sure that your welder is certified to make structural welds. Not all welders are created equal. I was gonna learn and do it myself, but I quickly realized that I can't do that, because they're actually inspected. Not only are they inspected, but they're inspected by special inspectors by a third party who actually know what they're looking for, and they'll actually even x-ray your welds to make sure that they're sound. Now, my cost should have been a lot higher if I wasn't helping out and doing a lot of the grunt work for Cody, cutting out the doors and the windows, and just basically being an assistant to Cody here while he's doing the hard work. Metal work took us about 4 months, and the supplies, materials, and labor costs all together was about $20,000. Next was to get this space watertight, since all the cuts we made has this place leaking like crazy, so it's roof time. Now, I decided to go with the butterfly roof system, which is basically two low-sloped roofs meeting each other in the middle. Kind of looks like butterfly wings, thus the name. Now, we had to order trusses and bring on a framing crew to build out the roof, which took about a week and another $8,000. Before we closed close it all up, I did have to insulate it, which I'll get to here in a little bit. Now, I spent a bit more money for this waterproof ice and shield membrane and the mesh air membrane underneath the metal roof. This acts as a second line defense for any water intrusion or condensation. Now, if you know me and you know how I like to build my projects, I typically over-engineer everything. I try to make things as bulletproof as possible, especially when it comes to water. So I also opted for metal roofing to stay true to the metal of the containers, but it's just simple and I think it looks way better too. Now, roofing prep, supplies, materials, and labor came out to be right at $15,000 in total.
So I'm always building or remodeling a new space. Now, most of the time it's for a new, unique income generating vacation rental, kind of like this place right here. And because a lot of my properties were either remote or smack dab in the middle of the city, I wanted to be able to monitor the space when it was empty, see when guests made it safely, and even give my guests a security system that they could use to protect their belongings when they're out and exploring. And that's when I decided to invest in my Simply Safe system. Now, we put one in our main home as well, and let me tell you, their 24/7 professional monitoring, which is exclusively powered by Fast Protect technology, is no joke. And it's less than $1 a day, which is half the cost of traditional home security brands. Now, there are no long-term contracts, so you can start and stop anytime with no hidden fees, which is something I've taken advantage of with my AIRSTREAM, which is also protected by Simply Safe. Now, setup is super easy and it's all wireless, like the new smart alarm indoor wireless camera that offers immediate intruder deterrence. Everything literally comes in a box just like this, so you don't need to set up a service appointment. The entire system is delivered to your door. And of course, the advanced response technology to confirm if the threat is real or the homeowner forgetting to turn off the alarm. Now, as summer's wrapping up, this is a perfect addition to protect any home. Now, if you use my link down below, not only will you get your first month free of Fast Protect monitoring, but you'll also get 20% off your entire system, cameras, sensors, everything.
Big shout out to Simply Safe for sponsoring today's video. Now that the space is dried in, it's time to start framing so we can do rough-in utilities. Now, at the time, because of the fiasco of 2020, thou who shall not be named, we literally didn't have access to a lot of lumber. Literally, we didn't have lumber. 2 of our lumber yards got burned down, and then 2020 happened. So between lumber yards and Home Depot trips, I was trying to get whatever I could get my hands on. I promised my firstborn son and one of my kidneys just for a stack of 2x4s that you see here. Now, in the end, all the framing and lumber done cost about $12,000, which is a lot if you consider how little framing this little space actually required. But with framing done, it's time to rough in electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. Here, I decided to save on a lot of the costs and the fact that I either couldn't find anyone due to the labor shortage or someone who could do it at fair rate. So I ran all the electrical and brought in some extra help at the end to make up the boxes panel and do a horizontal driller to trench underneath our main driveway to the main panel. I needed help for that. I didn't have all the time in the world at that time. Now, electrical supplies and labor cost $10,000, and copper is stupid expensive, and it still is. Now, I know many of you are already like, okay, this is getting really expensive, Kai. Trust me, I know. I was writing all these checks and maxing out my credit card, but in the end, it was worth it, not just because of the finished product, but how much money I ended up making. Keep watching and I'll explain it all to you here in a second. Okay, so I also had my plumbing buddy come out and help me with some of the plumbing, which ended up costing me about $3,000 in materials and labor. And then I brought in an HVAC company, who coincidentally is also a friend of mine, to install the mini split and air exchange system for $12,000. Now, all of this took a total of about 6 months of work, and a lot of that was waiting around for materials, supplies, and of course labor. Now it's time to speed this thing up and take care of the exterior. Now, we began prepping for the windows and doors to go in. By the way, this gray paint that you see around the windows is specifically made for raw metal so it doesn't rust. Very important if you guys are dealing with metal or containers, make sure that you paint all your cuts or any metal that's going in. You don't want rust occurring. The total for our window door package was $8,500. Now, remember how we had to cut a container into 2? Well, now it requires siding on either side of those cuts. I also decided to add tongue and groove cedar underneath the soffits to pop with our final paint scheme. Now, at the time, I also added the gutters because we're working on the siding and the exterior. All of this cost about $8,000 in labor and materials. While working on the outside, I decided to finish the final deck space as well, which cost me another $4,500. Going back inside, it was time to insulate and make this place feel comfortable. Now, with containers, you always, I repeat, always have to use closed cell spray foam, otherwise you'll run into condensation issues. And plus, it's always very satisfying watching spray foam being sprayed in. I don't know what it is, but I wish I could do it, but they never let me actually hold the gun and shoot the spray, although I've asked a lot. Now for the roof, I used about 5 inches of closed cell foam and then filled in the rest with about 18 inches of the pink stuff, pink bat fiberglass foam. The walls, I did 2 inches of closed cell and I finished off the rest with rock wool. Down below in the floors, I did about 7 inches of closed cell foam. Altogether, installation of the spray foam, fiberglass, and rock wool was again $8,000. Time to cover everything up with drywall. We opted for level 5 smooth wall, which is my personal favorite, where drywall was to be seen and used, and then everywhere else we just basically hung drywall, and then I had it fire taped to save some money on the level 5 smooth wall because we were going to cover it with accent wall materials like concrete and wood. Now drywall only took a few days and cost $6,000 in labor materials. Now it's time for flooring, which we had to use self-leveler for the areas between the containers where we made the big cut out for the walls and put down a subfloor first. Now there's already like an 1.5 to 2 inch thick marine grade subfloor here, but we did end up having to use a small subfloor to level everything out and have a nice smooth flat surface for obviously our luxury vinyl plank LVP. Now per usual, I opted for a light oak LVP with a 20 mil protective layer and foam underside. I use LVP almost religiously now in all my income properties because they're virtually bulletproof. I talk about it in my previous videos. I really don't use anything else because hardwoods and engineered woods scratch like crazy, especially in high traffic areas. 100% you will get it damaged and scratched if you use it in a rental. So LVP to the rescue. Materials and labor for this space for the flooring was $6,200. Now, somewhere around this time, we found this little guy, barely surviving next to our container home in the bushes. We named him Finn. We paused construction for a bit as he lived in the main bedroom and got his strength back, and eventually found a nice family to adopt him. Now he's a full-grown fat cat. Back to the build. It's now time for one of my favorite parts, the cabinets and countertops. It totally changes a space when these go in, and I love the process of watching them go into a home or into a space. Now we decided on semi-custom cabinets, which isn't super high-end, but it's more in the middle high area, I guess you could say, and quartz countertop with a waterfall. Cabinets were $15,000 and took about a month to build out and install, and then the countertops took about a week waiting for materials and an afternoon to install for $4,000. Then it's time for painting the interior and exterior, which was a ton of prep work because of how we wanted things painted and the design callouts. Materials were relatively very inexpensive, maybe a few $1,000s, but ultimately it cost me $13,000 in total for the interior and exterior work. Again, a lot of that was a prep because we painted the conduit, we did the walls and the ceiling in different colors and all that stuff. And after all of that, it's time for what I call final work, which includes tiling for the bathroom, putting in finished fixtures such as lights, faucets, and the accent walls throughout the space, including the LED lights that we have lighting up the living room space and then also the kitchen. Now, also part of the finished work is also making up all the electrical boxes with the switches and outlets and the plate covers, which I opted for this super nice heavy duty industrial look and feel, but it cost me a small fortune. Light switches and plates alone, it's embarrassing to say, but I think I spent over $2,200 just for the outlets, switches, and plates. But I do think they add a lot to the place. Now at this point, things were starting to come together and look like a real home and living space rather than just a hollowed out metal box. All said and done, final work cost an estimated $22,000. That gives me a grand total of $206,000 and $900 if I did my math correctly for this build. Otherwise, my editor will put the right number in right here. Now, after ordering all the furniture and decor, we can also add another $20,000 on top of that number, and this is what we ended up with. And here we are inside the space, finally.
it's done. Now, my original budget was $125,000, but because of everything that happened a couple years ago, it was a complete cluster with prices skyrocketing, and we were literally sitting around for several months just waiting for things to get back to some sort of normal state. Now, if I were to do it all over again today, I think I could do it for around $150,000, and if I had to do it pre-2019, I think I could have done it for less than $100,000. And if this was all stick-built, I could probably do it for $75,000. But we ended up getting it done, and I owe a huge thank you to all my friends and contractors who helped me get this to the finish line, including Sarah. Thank you so much.
All right, well, we've got quite a few more walls to do. I'll come back and I'll check in on you in a couple hours.
Okay.
But let's talk about how much I really made on this project, because I know a lot of people saying like, oh, he didn't make any money, he overspent, budget was blown, overrated. I get it, I hear it. So I recently had the property appraised just before the container project took off, and our property here came in at $1.25 million, or roughly $500 a square foot. Now, before I hear it in the comments section, I know that's very high and it seems really high. Keep in mind, there's places in Austin that are just basic homes that are selling $500, $750, even $1,000 a square foot. But the reason why this place here is priced as it is because of three core reasons, or three key reasons. Number one, comps in this area are other high-end, larger homes. Two, the property is on 7 acres with valley and lake views. I'm pointing at the valley and the lake right now. And then lastly, third is I'm also in a great area that's safe with a good school district. But I agree, $500 a square foot is kind of high. But with the space here and the shop and the office space, we added another 700 square feet of conditioned space. So on the high side, we're looking at $350,000 in constructed equity, but I think more realistically, we're closer to the $400 a square foot range, or $280,000 in equity generated. Now subtract out our cost basis, or is our building cost, we are left with just over $70,000 in built equity. Not too bad of a margin, although it would have been a lot more if it wasn't for 2020. Either way, I made my money back on my project and I'm pretty happy about it. But at the time of this filming, we've also been live and Airbnb the space, and it has surpassed my expectations. Now, in less than a month of being live, it has generated over $6,500 in gross revenues. Our previous container home on the property, which is just right over there, in its best month did about $4,400. Now, to put that into contrast, in my specific area, the average is around $2,500, maybe $2,750, with occupancy rates hovering around 60%, maybe even 55%. So to be able to be in the first month hit $6,500 at nearly 85% occupancy, I'm really happy with it. Now, what makes this even more special is that, like I said, this was our first month of being live, where it takes time to get in the algorithm, the listing shows no reviews, and we're discounting the normal rate between 20 to 33% off to get more bookings, and then of course building our reviews. Now, also considering that our monthly fixed expenses on the space is only $400, there is a very healthy margin each and every month. Break even for us is roughly 3 nights booked each month, which I know for a fact that we will be able to book for the rest of the year super easily. Now, we're still in our good season, but it's slowing down as we step into fall, but I project that we'll continue to bring in somewhere around $4,000 during our slow months, and then during our peak months, which is gonna be next summer, I see us easily surpassing $7,000, maybe even $8,000 a month during our peak season, moving us towards what I think is gonna be around $65,000 to $70,000 in income in this one space, meaning that we'll reach our investment payback in less than 3 years. But if we include the equity built, it'll be less than 2 years. And I know you all love cash on cash returns. So just for you, my year over year cash on cash number is about 31.4%. Now, if we include equity, that bumps up to 65% in the first year, which isn't half bad. Now, don't forget to set up your free call with me or my team if you're ready to do a unique build of your own. And if you like our videos, subscribe and watch how one of our members turned a $13,000 garden shed into $84,000 a year in income.